This is a number 12 Kolinsky sable. Comes to a nice point, so that's why I'm going to use this, and I'm going to mix up kind of a flesh tone here initially to get some of the color that I want. So always make sure my brush is clean water to get started, and I'm just going to come in here and pick up some of these reds and yellows. I'm going to mop my palette up a little bit. You got to be careful with flesh tones at first because it's easy to get them muddy if you're not paying attention. I've got a little bit of green pigment in here, and green and flesh tones makes mud. So, all right, clean that up, ready to go. So I've got some yellow on my brush. I'm going to pick up a little red here. Essentially want to, catch. I'm painting from a black and white photo, as you can see, but as I've downloaded other color photos of Teddy Roosevelt, this kind of gives me some indication of what his coloring is like. Not too different than most people of that ilk, but what I want to do is emphasize where the color is. So I'm going to come in here on the tip of his nose and get some of this color in here and up into this area. Now, as you can see, his face starts to move into shadow over here and light. So I don't want to get too warm. So he's got this light that's hitting his face right in this area. So I want to make sure I leave some place for that. You can see it here on his cheekbone and up under his eye. So I want to make sure I can catch some of that. All right. And I'm going to pull out another brush just to have it available to soften specific areas. Very rarely do you have sharp edges on a face, so what I'm going to do is, while this is damp, I can come in here and spread this a little bit, fill in this area here, and then soften, because these features really begin to soften in here. And as we move out into this part of his face, it's going to cool down because he's in shadow. So I'm going to get some of this, some of that, and soften in this area. Where the light is hitting his cheeks. And there's a little bit of highlight here on the outside edge of the nostril of his nose. So I'm going to get some of that. Good. And the same will be true down here. There's light hitting the top of his lip, and so I'm just paying really critical attention to where the light and the shadows go. Keep this wet and moving. Again, getting more of a soft change in here. So I'm using water. Water is always my agent of change. And what I'm using is a number 6 brush here, handling some of the details, and my number, I think it's a 12 I'm using here. It just has a bigger head on it, okay? So as I move into this side of the face, I'm going to start to pick up some cooler reds. What's happening is he's moving into shadow, so I'm going to start to cool this down over here. This whole part of his face is cooling, even a little bit in the underplane of the nose here, and in some of the shadow areas inside the edge of his nose. You can see where the shadows collect. So I want to get that in there, and there's some inside the glasses here too. It gets really kind of dark in there. So just paying attention to where the values change from warm to cool and from light to dark. And I'm getting some reflections inside the glasses here. So I want to catch those, leaving the paper to do that. But right inside here, his eyelid is surrounded by this dark shadow area. And that's starting to pick up over in here. There's a core shadow, if you will, and that's the part of the face that is darkest from the rest of the face. So I'm starting to put some of that area in here. In fact, up inside the eye there, I'm going to pick up, oddly enough, a little blue to really darken that down in there. That's getting very dark inside his glasses, so I want to try to catch that. And the same thing is happening up in here by his nose, getting a little bit dark right there, the tip of his nose. I might even go, got to kind of feel your way through it, but at least I've got good information to work from. So I'm going to get a little more of this dark in here, and we'll come in later for the dark part of his nostril. Lifting out where the cheeks are if I need to. I can blot a little bit. Pick up some of that paint so I've got that highlight on his face. And a soft change going on up in here. So back in here, his chin and his face start to get cooler because there's the light's out here. And it's, again, there are certain places where there's a soft transition like we have here. I want to make sure I get that. And there's a little bit of what I call reflected light coming up under his chin here. So I'm going to come back in with a little bit of yellow and red up under here to get this sense of reflected light bouncing off essentially the color of his uniform, or the light that's hitting the front of his uniform here. So I'm going to have a little bit of that coming back through, a little cooler tones right along the core shadow. I'll deal with his mustache a little bit later. Gotta be careful not to let this dry too much over here. Yeah. If ever you drop your brush, as I just did and made a mistake, quickly get some water, wash it down, blot it out. Sometimes it's a happy accident and you get something better than you'd anticipate, but more often than not, it's not. So I'm just going to blot that up and get back to what I was doing up here. So everything in Teddy's face starts to go into shadow back here. So I'm just catching. So essentially the face is turning away from light to shadow. So as I turn that, not only am I going darker, but I'm going cooler in my temperature. So I'm starting to pick up some really cool reds here and some almost purpley tones. So this will give me the shadow shapes that I'm after back in this side of his head. And this whole section starts to eventually move into a shadow tone in his hat, which we'll attend to a little bit later. I may do a little soft transitioning over here too. Okay, so I want to make sure I don't make sure these edges are soft where the face turns. Because the light is right on the tip of his nose here. So good, got that. Now from the pictures I've seen, Teddy's eyes are kind of this nice blue tone. I can't verify that for sure, but it looks like that's what was going on. So I'm going to try to get in there and get a little of that blue color happening. Get a little bit of this shadow underneath his eye here. Good. Okay, so far so good there. All right, so I'm going to come in and pick up a little cerulean blue, maybe a touch of green in it, a little cerulean blue, and I'm going to tackle this section right in here and pull it out into his lid. And there's some parts of the eye that are a little bit outlined here. I'll get to that a little bit later. But at least get that initial step in there. Looks a little bit like an alien right now because that blue is so powerful, but we will work with that. I want to get these dark tones in here that surround his eye. He's looking very serious. The light is really hitting his eyelid, so I want to make sure that shows up there. So I'm using another brush, clean brush, just to lift out a little of the color I've placed down, so this keeps the lighting properly. Okay, so far so good there. All right. Got to work it, but not too much. It's a little bit tricky. All right, I want to restate a little bit the shadow side of his nose. Make sure that that catches. And his cheek pops there, so that's good. I'm going to punch up the color in there a little bit. The thing that people do too often in a portrait is, in an attempt to get that perfect flesh tone, they tend to underpaint it. There's a lot of color in a face, and so you want to make sure you do get some reds and other colors in there. Otherwise, you'll get that perfect flesh tone, mixing up yellow and red, maybe just a touch of green in it to dull it back. But what'll happen is watercolor always dries a little lighter, and so by the time it's dry, the person looks like they're dead or jaundiced because the flesh tone is just so pale. So I'm just making sure I get just the right stuff. And sometimes you just have to push it. Like, you know, Teddy Roosevelt loved being outside rough riding those horses in the West. So I'm going to make sure he's got some color in those parts of the face that would catch that. So that's going to be in here. I'm punching up the reds a little bit in his nose so that it really reads, and then making sure it gets a little bit darker behind the nose here where the shadows are cast. Sometimes if you need to, I have a little scrubber brush here, which is an abrasive brush, very stiff. Unlike the standard watercolor brush, it's a stiff, bristly brush. So if I've lost some of the lights that I want, I can scrub a little bit to lift those out again. Because I want to make sure I have the lighting on the bridge of his nose here. That's pretty good. Got to be very careful with these kinds of brushes because they're very abrasive, and on wet paper they'll just put a hole right through it if you're not careful. So, all right, getting this underplane of the nose, a little reflection in here. That's sort of what I want. I'm going to let that set up a little bit. I can adjust it when I come back. This is just helping me soften some edges. And I want to get that crisp edge of his spectacles right there. So just doing a little tune-up in here to get these shapes right. There's a little shadow cast right under the edge of the glasses here, so this helps to illustrate the thickness of the glasses, some of the shadows under his eyes. All right. Okay, so far so good there. Let's tackle this area here. There's a little bit of a shadow that the hat casts across his face. So I'm going to get those pinks with a little purple in them up there too. And we're just going to wrap this in under here like so. And I've got to keep that a soft turning edge because again it's light on a rounded form, does not have a hard edge. So keeping that soft in there. Okay, I think what we'll do next is come up and work on the hat a little bit. And it's creeping a little bit more than I want. All right. Test your paper, see if it's dry in the right areas. That way you don't want to go into a painting that's still drying because you'll lose the edge on something. So you always want to test your paper before you come back into it. Getting a little bit of warmth under the chin where he's getting some reflected light. Okay, good.